So that's how you can get tickets to this. But this is what we're doing tonight, and we were thinking, how do we even start this? And then it hit us. So we'll make sure the volume is up because there's only one way to start this.
Love, exciting and new.
Come on. This is not what you think when it comes to romance.
Storytelling is in the soul of every romance author, and this area is a veritable breeding ground for authors who weave romance into stories of serial killer mysteries, paranormal shapeshifters, Norse mythology, and even service dog training. Tonight, Aunties presents Galentines, a romance panel as a Northwest Passages event. And one can expect not to judge books by just their covers. Meet Asa Maria Bradley, a physics professor who bends the rules between universes in the Viking Warrior series. Lucy Gilmore, Tamara Morgan, one and the same person who creates rom-com books listed in the best of romance titles for 2019. Her latest ventures into puppy love promise more than just puppy kisses. Katee Robert. Her books have sold over 1 million copies, yet she runs errands incognito around the town she grew up in. Rebecca Zanetti left the boring lawyer life to write books with kissing in them. These prolific authors all live and work in the Pacific Northwest and meet monthly. We've invited ourselves into their monthly chats with Carolyn Lamberson to find out how these award-winning authors keep it real. Please welcome our romance panel to the Northwest Passages stage.
Hello, welcome. Nice to see everyone here tonight. I'm going to stand over here and let our 4 authors take center stage. So my first question for you all is, the 4 of you are friends. How did you all meet, and how often do you get together, and what are those events like?
Okay, I'll start. I met everybody, I think, in 2013 we used to have a local RWA chapter, and I joined to see there was a lot of local romance authors, and then from there we just sort of formed our little subgroup out of there, and the chapter no longer exists, but we meet monthly now. Yeah.
That's pretty much what happened.
So where do you guys get together?
Asa usually tells us where we're going to meet. She sends out a text and says, we're going to meet here.
It's always someplace with wine.
Yes.
That's a good rule. Yeah. Do you have a favorite restaurant you'd like to recommend, Asa?
Thanks, Rebecca. It depends, because Rebecca lives in the other state, in Idaho, so we try to sort of do like around the Valley Mall. Okay. I think Twigs is usually where we are, because they have good martinis and other things. Yeah. So that's probably where we meet most frequently.
And what are those events like? What do you guys? Do you share work? Do you just complain about publishers? Do you bitch about your editors? Because that's what journalists do. So.
We don't really share work. I mean, we also like chat and email each other in between. So, I mean, if you wanted to, I guess we could send each other work, but I don't know that we have so far. But we do gossip.
I was going to say gossip, and I thought I won't say that.
And wine, both verbal and drinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a like meetup, like update with what's going on with life and work and the industry, because there's things that happen in our jobs or our industry that like only people who are romance authors can like really understand. And so it's nice to meet with like-minded friends and get some face-to-face time.
Yeah, we spend so much of our time at home with our computers alone, so being able to get out and actually interact with other humans
and
who
put on
understand
pants.
It.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think is the biggest misconception that people have about the work that you do and the books that you write? I mean, I think people have a pretty idea about what the stereotype is.
What time are we ending?
Yeah. They think it's easy, that like it's not real. So like we get a lot of comments of like, oh, when you write a real book, or in my spare time I would, you know, write a romance novel and like make a bunch of money. And so there's a dismissiveness that it's not challenging, when realistically, if you look at like your favorite like suspense authors, if a lot of times the ones that have the most enriching characters started in romance.
And the books are not all about sex. I mean, that's actually usually a pretty small part of it, but that's kind of what people want to talk about, or they'll talk about those sex books, and that's a small part of a romance, really. I mean, it's an important part, but same with life.
And you all put in a lot of research into your stories too, right? It's not just like sitting at your computer and totally like imagining things. It's time doing Google searches and heading to the library and doing that kind of stuff too, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
We're all on the FBI list because of our Google searches.
Every once in a while, I'll put "for writing" next to it, just in case they're watching.
Also, I think in terms of misconceptions, I think a lot of, like most genre writers, whether you're writing mystery or thrillers or romance, people who don't write genre sometimes says, oh, it's a formula. You just follow the formula and then it's really easy. But actually, I like to think of it, it's not like if you declare yourself in a particular genre, then you're giving your readers a promise, and you have to deliver on that. And so it's not a formula as much as this contract you have with your readers, and then you have to be the one person that are delivering on that promise differently than anybody else does. So like this will be the one romance that they think, oh, well, maybe there won't be a happily ever after. Like maybe this will be the one romance where they don't get together, or you know, maybe this will be the mystery that they don't solve the mystery, because you want them to be like that engaged in the book. So it's, to me, it's actually a hard thing to write a genre book, more so than maybe writing. Well, I shouldn't say more so than writing literary fiction, but it's not an easy thing to deliver.
And oftentimes it's not just writing one book, right? You're writing, you know, multiple books about the same characters or the same kinds of general themes, and so that must add to the complexity of the storytelling that you're doing, correct?
Oh, yeah, it definitely does. I was just going to add that one of the big misconceptions is that when most of us think of romance novels, we think of the 1980s Fabio covers, the bodice rippers. I mean, everybody is familiar with them, and it's so different nowadays. I mean, the romance novels are the most feminist novels that you will find on the market today. We're tackling complex issues that affect the modern woman and the modern man, and so if you think about them only in those terms, you're missing a huge piece of the puzzle.
Romance readers are very, very voracious, and so they, I don't know if primarily, but if there's a side character, they are looking for that next book that features that side character. And so it primes you to write series, but if you have fans who are reading that series, there's definitely continuity that you have to keep in mind, and it's not, the longer you spend in that world, the more complex it gets and the more side characters and whatnot gets created. And if you don't keep those lines, you know, linear, somebody will call you on it. Because they know your readers are very smart and they do not miss anything ever.
I agree. You'll get that email regardless, you know.
She had green eyes.
She had green eyes. Or no, this child should be 5, not 4.5.
Really? That
yeah.
Precise? Wow, that's impressive. So I know that a few years ago, a book series called 50 Shades of Grey came out, which, for good or for bad, got a lot of people reading who maybe didn't always read genre fiction, who didn't read books that were sexy, didn't read books about romance at all. So if you could recommend one book to a person who doesn't normally read the romance genre, what would that title be, and why would you, I mean, what kinds of things would you look for as a romance reader that you like to see in the books that are out there?
You know, I think that's difficult because romance has so many subgenres. So I'd start there, say, you know, what are you interested in? Are you interested in paranormal or sci-fi or fantasy or romantic suspense or, you know, contemporary puppies? I mean, it's such a huge genre that I'd start there before I said, okay, this is who I'd recommend.
And we talk about heat level too, like do you want, because in most romance, it's not so much about, like Rebecca said, it's not so much about the sex, it's about the build up to the sex, like the tension. We all love that scene from Pride and Prejudice where they're gazing at each other across the ballroom, right? So how you set up your heat level in the book, some people like all that tension build up and then they want the bedroom door closed, and some people want to be in the bedroom with the characters. And so that's also something to take into consideration. But whatever you like in terms of mystery or horror or erotica, like there is like a subgenre in romance that fits that. There's even inspirational romance where like you're like across the field in the neighbor's yard, like so far away from the sex that, but you still see that tension building up between the characters. And then historical romance, which has the readers that knows everything because they research everything. So if you get the wrong buttons on the uniform, they'll tell you. So that's probably what I would ask first, like what do you like to read and what are you interested in? Yeah.
Does that wide number of genres make it easier for writers to find a niche in the industry, do you think, or is it more challenging?
Right now it's a little bit of both, because there are so many avenues to be published now. You can go the traditional route and publish with publishers. You can independently publish and do it yourself. And I think that if you know your reader that you're trying to write to and you fulfill your promise, it can be a lot easier to find those readers who want that specific thing that you're writing and be successful within that niche. But I mean, it's going to be challenging just because there's such a sheer number of romances specifically, but books in general put out at any given time. It can be very overwhelming to you can be lost in that sea. But it's no matter what you're writing, if it's romantic suspense with serial killers or blue-skinned aliens or whatever, there's readers who want that, and there's a community who's just waiting to grab that up and devour all your books.
And yeah, some readers, when you write across genres, will hop with you. They'll go wherever they'll follow you wherever you go. And others only want when you write certain books in certain categories. And they're all welcome and whatever,
With a certain series.
Yeah, sometimes they'll just stick within a series.
So I know that we talked earlier, you all have fans who write you, fans who reach out, fans who do some really interesting things to show how much they love you. What are some of the more interesting interactions you've had with some of your fans, and how crazy can they be? And I'm looking at you.
Me? I had a fan who put a tattoo of my book on her body, and so that was new. That was different. I also have a group. Actually, there was a group who started role-playing online, the characters, and then they got in a fight with each other, so they formed 2 groups, and then there were 3 groups. And so then I had people on Facebook trying to friend me who were my characters that I'd made up. And then there was this huge thing going on that one of the characters died because they were writing fan fiction. And I got on there and I was trying to figure out, because they can't just kill my character. Well, the person playing the character actually really died. And so, yeah, so they're all going to this funeral. And I didn't know what to say. I mean, I'm sorry for your loss. So that's my story.
Who can follow that up with anything? I also have a reader who tattooed my name on them once, and that was exciting. No, my favorite is my publisher got a handwritten letter from a woman who I'm assuming was of a certain age because she did not have access to the internet, but asking when the next of my Mafia books was coming out, because she really liked those books, that series, very much. And so somebody's grandma is super into sexy mafia books, and I will keep that letter forever because it's amazing.
I do think that the fan mails from the older generation are the best ones. I had one where a woman told me that even though she's been on the planet, or been on the planet, I can't remember now, she's been reading books for longer than I've been alive. That's what it was. I did a pretty good job.
That is the definition of a backhanded compliment if I've ever heard one.
I have a lady who talks to Loki, or Loki talks to her, and I'm not doing it right in my books because Loki talks to her, and I'm apparently not portraying him properly. So I've gotten, I think, 2 emails from her.
So this next couple questions I have for Tamara, aka Lucy Gilmore. You write under pseudonyms. How do you keep it all straight? And are there things that you write about that you could write about under Tamara's name that wouldn't work under Lucy's name, or vice versa? Or
So it's complicated. I have a total of 3 pen names, 2 romance names and 1 cozy mystery name. And so the cozy mysteries and romance, they're such separate genres and they're such separate books that it's not difficult to keep them apart. But my Lucy Gilmore and Tamara Morgan, Lucy Gilmore writes happy, puppy, cheerful books all of the time. And so Tamara Morgan wrote a little bit darker. She liked jewel thieves and con men and stuff. And so I have to be really careful not to slip back into the darker themes that I enjoy and remember that I'm sunshine and light.
Is there one of those personalities, for lack of a better word, that you enjoy exploring more than the other ones?
Oh, I think I like them all equally. It's like putting on a new outfit.
It's confusing for us because we don't know what to call her. You know, I practiced saying Lucy all the way over here.
Try remembering to sign books in the correct name.
I couldn't do it.
So when Tamara started writing the cozy romances, because I know her as Tamara Morgan. That's who she was when I met her. That's the outfit she was wearing when I met her. And so when she started writing the cozy mysteries, I was like, oh, Tamara Berry, that's a really smart name because, you know, there's like other mystery writers who are last name Berry. Like, why did you pick that? And she's like, it's on my driver's license.
So, Asa, I know that you write, when you're writing your Viking books, I have to ask you, do you picture Tom Hiddleston as Loki? Because I probably would. But more seriously, I'm wondering if the Marvel movies and the popularity of Thor sort of broadened your audience a little bit, because at least now more people know who Odin is, for example. They know what Midgard is. They're familiar with that vocabulary a little bit more than maybe an average American audience would have been before those movies came out.
Yeah, I don't know. I think both. Like, Tom Hiddleston has sort of complicated things for me, because when I set up the series, Loki was the villain. He's not redeemable. He's evil. And everybody's like, when's Loki going to get his book? When is he going to be the hero? And I'm like, he's not the hero. He's like the worst person ever. And right when I think I'd written the first book and I was trying to sell it, I was pitching it to agents and editors, and it finaled in a contest, and an editor at Tor read it. And the edits that I got back from her was, because they read it blind, they don't know anything about who you are, was, oh, this person obviously just copied like the Marvel universe. This is all fan fiction. And then I met her at a conference shortly after, and I just said, thank you, like, this is my book, and you gave me really great feedback. And I said, I just wanted to let you know it was not fan fiction. Like, I grew up in Sweden, it's very much Norse mythology. Because she'd only read like the first chapter. And she said, oh, I would have read that book completely differently had I known that. So I don't know. I think that it's fun because more people know about Vikings and the mythology, but sometimes I'll get, you know, they expect the Marvel universe and it isn't, to certain, like, it's very much Norse mythology, kind of grounded in what I grew up with growing up in Sweden, and it's not on a different planet, and that sometimes gets confusing. Also, the gods are not on the page as much as they are in the Marvel universe. So yes, familiarity, but also, that lady that talks to Loki, I'm not doing it right for everybody.
So I know that to kind of keep on your story a little bit, you have a day job, and you're a physics teacher at SCC, and SFCC, sorry. I've gotten them mixed up my entire life. I'm sorry about that. And I love that you teach science, but you have this really creative outlet. And so I'm wondering how one feeds the other and vice versa. Do you bring a kind of a scientific method to your writing? And how does your writing influence your academic life?
I mean, I think so, because I really like science, but I also really like fantasy and science fiction. And basically my books are fantasy with a love story. That's paranormal romance. The only sort of difference really is that there's a more of a focus on the love story and that each couple gets their happy ending in each book. So yeah, I have a lot of science in there. Unfortunately, my editor often takes it out. I'm in physical sciences, so when I wrote the first book, I really researched the adrenaline system because Naya, who's the main character there, she's like a genetically modified soldier, and her adrenaline system works differently than other people. And it was super fascinating, and I had like 5 pages on that, and the editor was like, let's cut this down to 1 paragraph, shall we? So I was like, it's really interesting. She's like, yeah, not for 5 pages. So yeah, I'm conscious of things being grounded in science. Like I have nanoparticles are in the book, and I had some feedback from somebody that said, you're mixing fantasy and science fiction. And I said, what's the science fiction? And they said, nanoparticles. I'm like, that's in your toothpaste. So I think that sometimes I get a little bit carried away and I don't realize that what's like here now for me is not here now for everybody yet. Yeah, I use both, I think. Both the science. You have to be creative in science, and you have to be logical in your writing career. So I think the two merge very well.
So speaking of bringing your past life into your current job, Rebecca, you've had a pretty interesting life. You were an aide to Ronald Reagan at one point. You worked as an art curator. You were a lawyer. You apparently met Jason Momoa once, which is, you know, if there's anyone who was meant to be in a romance novel cover, it's Jason Momoa. How did all of these things, how did this path lead you to where you're at right now, which is a New York Times bestselling writer?
Well, I'd say that Jason Momoa could inspire anybody, you know, the more people you meet, the more characters you create in your head, and you'll find that a lot of lawyers become authors for some reason, and I think it's because it's the same skill set. You're trying to convince somebody of something using a creative way to do it. You know, a jury is a lot like a reader, except sometimes readers are a lot tougher than juries. So I think that's one of the reasons why you see both. So the law probably has influenced me more, the analytical aspect, than any other career. So, and I was an intern with Reagan's office. It was way after he was president. I think I printed things out, to be honest.
Still, as a former president, that's still pretty cool.
Yeah, he was pretty cool.
So, and you've written, I think you were saying 55 books, which seems like a lot. Now that you've reached that level of success, where do you kind of envision the next step is your career? Where do you want to see your writing go to next? Do you want to make movies? Do you want to I don't know. What do you want to do?
Well, I don't want to make movies. I want to keep writing books. But if somebody else wants to make a movie out of one of the books, that'd be great. We did sign a series with a film TV agent, but that process is really slow. So I think that, no matter what happens, I'll keep writing books because that's what I enjoy doing. So I don't see that changing.
And for Katee, I've read that you've written in young adult fiction and horror before landing in what you call speculative romance. Please explain what you mean by that phrase.
Yeah, what does it mean?
Well, that was originally, that phrase was, I wrote science fiction romance that my publisher didn't want to label science fiction romance because it's a weird redheaded stepchild of both the romance industry and the science fiction industry. It's a little too sciencey for romance folk and too touchy-feely for science fiction folk. And so there's only one series, and before I ended up landing in contemporary romance, and that's what I write now. But I guess you could say the current stuff's speculative just because it happens in a world that's our world, but it's cities that don't exist here, and you have to give a little bit of forgiveness as readers that you're latching yourself in for the experience and not necessarily to question certain things too hard because it's all about the experience.
That's interesting. You talk about creating a place. I think of shows like Gilmore Girls, which I think the best thing about that show is it created such a sense of place in Stars Hollow. It was a place that everyone wanted to go to. It was a place that everyone wanted to visit. They felt like they knew. And so when you guys are writing these stories about these fictional places, do you imagine them as real places, and do you hope that your readers are able to come to that conclusion too?
I would say yes. I am a very visual person, so I need some sort of map, and even if it's just like some squiggles on a paper, like that's how I keep track of things. But any successful series, especially romance, has some sort of central type of place where the characters gather, which is how you meet the side characters that will be future main characters. But it gives a sense of like familiarity that will show up in every book, or many books, that readers can kind of touch in and like, oh, that's what's happening with our friends over there. And it's that kind of experience, like with Gilmore Girls, where you really feel like you're almost part of the town when you're viewing that show.
It's a really good way to do Easter eggs too, so you can have like a kind of an inside joke in one series, like a place or an idea, and then in a totally separate series you can put a reference to it, and your readers who follow you will be so delighted when they figure it out.
Stephen King is a master of that with Salem's Lot and Castle Rock, and the way those towns show up in stories about the other one. As a reader, I kind of stuff, so I'm glad I love that you guys do it too. Another question for Katee. So we love your covers. Your covers are super diverse, and the characters that you write about are also pretty diverse. I am assuming that is an intentional choice that you're making, and that you're wanting to help diversify the market and the content of these stories. Yes,
I think the best way to promote diversity is to support diverse creators, but my characters, you can't really look around the world and see all white heterosexual people. And so it makes sense to me to have like a reflection of the world in my books, but I don't know if I do it with the intention of diversifying as much as it's just, I have an idea of the characters in my head, of like their personality, and like I said, I'm very visual, and so I go cruising stock photo sites to find somebody who fits the feel of the person that I'm trying to put on the page. And so yeah, that's how I create these characters. And as far as the book covers go, there's so many subgenres in romance that it's really important to code your books so that readers can manage their expectations, which is why a lot of my books have, the romance cover, the clinch of like the couple together. But more recently, I've taken a turn towards like a bit saucier, a little bit darker content. And as a result, that's why I've kind of tried to convey that with my covers, because erotic romance has like you see a lot of it after 50 Shades of Grey. There was a lot of that trend in covers of not having people but having like objects or whatever, that it sets a reader expectation so that readers don't pick it up expecting like a sweet puppy romance and then be like, what is happening here? So readers kind of know before they even pick up my book that they have an idea of the type of story they're going to get, and that helps make sure nobody has a bad experience.
Do you think that books like Twilight, 50 Shades of Grey are good for your industry? Were they ultimately good for your industry, or did they cause some damage along the way too?
I think that they were, now having the hindsight of what we're almost a decade in, I think that they were instrumental in bringing a significant number of adult readers back to reading books. And I don't think that any book could get to that level of fame and not be picked apart. Is there problematic content? I mean, yeah, you could definitely argue that, and they're not my particular favorite books, but they have been so instrumental in bringing people back to reading. And people started reading 50 Shades and immediately went into like, what can I read next? And romance readers typically read like 8 to 10 books on average a month or something like that. Like, they read very voraciously. And so some of these people hadn't read a book since high school, and now they're reading 8 to 10 books a month. And so, for better or worse, the original content of 50 Shades and Twilight, they have done something really, really good for our industry and for, I would say, even like our country and society or whatever as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, people ask, how are you friends with other authors? Aren't you competing? And we're not competing against each other. We're competing against Netflix and Amazon Prime and binge reading. If somebody picks up a book and they like it, they're going to pick up another book. And so I think that both Twilight and 50 Shades, like Katee said, got people reading again, and then they kept continuing reading, and they turned off the Netflix for a little while. So I think that was good.
What's interesting about the crossover between visual media and book media is that nowadays, so I don't know how many of you have heard of the Chapters app. So it's an app where you you kind of play a game, and it's a romance story, and you get to make choices and make purchases. And they're actually based on romance
Choose your own
novels.
adventure for romance novel.
It is.
That's awesome.
And it started out where the app developers were just making the stories, but now they've started picking up romance novels. So Katee and Rebecca both have their books.
Yeah, so
in
we're
this
selling
app.
gaming rights all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And so I played mine, and it was very true to the book, and I blushed. I was like, oh my.
But those are also bringing in new readers because they play this game and they're like, oh, this is actually a book, and then they pick it up. So, I mean, that can only be good for everyone.
So, how do you write the perfect sex scene? How do you try to write the perfect sex scene? Is there such a thing?
Well,
I guess is the question.
if you're Katee, you get a bunch of Barbies together. If you follow Katee on social media, you can see what the Barbies are up to every now and then. I mean, I don't know, because like each character prefers different sex depending on like who they are. So it's like the hard part is just not repeating yourself, like to write something different. And also the sex scene is not there. I mean, if you could take the sex out of your book, then the sex shouldn't be in the book. The sex should be there to drive the story and drive the intimacy between the characters. So I don't know how the perfect sex scene comes around. It's just you channel whatever that character is horny about right then, I guess.
My husband's right there. You can ask him.
I think when I, like also said, everyone's different because, or every scene is different because the character composition of that story is different from any other story that you're writing. But I would say like the perfect sex scene is the one that the reader, but it's individual for each reader of like, oh, I didn't know I was into this, but apparently I'm super into this. And that's like my like feather in my cap of like, I didn't know that I was really dig this, but thank you.
And the sex scene should actually make the tension worse. You know, if you work up in a book and you have the tension and then you have this great sex scene, well, then they should go off and live happily ever after. It's got to create some sort of conflict in the romance.
Yeah, you have a goal. There's a goal with each sex scene. Like this is the scene where,
besides the obvious,
where you want them to have a fight at the end of it, or you want them to reveal something new about themselves, or have a panic attack. So there's almost always more than just the sex that's happening. There's like a specific plot point that needs to happen to drive the relationship at that moment in time. And so it's hard to be like, this is the perfect sex because we have an ulterior motive.
So is it a little bit frustrating for you guys, though, to be associated with to be associated with the genre? And people think of these as sex books, but here you are saying that the sex is really only a small part of these stories. Is it frustrating for you to kind of be stereotyped as what these stories really are not?
Yes, but like the industry as a whole, like we've mentioned, is very, very diverse as far as like heat level. Like you can find stuff where they like gaze longingly and like maybe brush a hand, and stuff where it's like very erotic. I write on the high end of the heat level, so like my books, like it's impossible to take the conversation about sex like and separate it from my books because of the heat level. But I think that it's hard for romance in general because it's so easy to be very dismissive, just because for whatever reason sex is so easy to just dismiss, of like, oh well, it's sex, so like whatever, it's those lady mommy porn books. So it's very frustrating.
I think also though, I mean, when I first started writing, I think I was craving like the respect, and I wanted like my genre to have the respect of like my other writing friends, and but then I think I was reading, I don't know, like an interview with Nora Roberts, who's like the queen of romance. She's been around forever, and she is prolific, crazy prolific, and she was sort of like, hey, like, why spending that emotional energy on trying to get people who don't write romance to respect romance? I mean, like we have, I don't know, 75% of the market share or something. So I want to spend my energy on getting the respect of the readers that already respect romance. And so I've kind of started not really caring about it as much. And then I think as a woman, like there's so many other things that get mansplained to me. That's just one other thing that gets mansplained to me. So I'm just like, yeah, whatever. Like, you're not my reader, so I'm not going to spend the energy.
All right, well, I have one more question for you guys, and that is, what is the advice that you would offer to anyone out in our audience who might want to take a crack at writing a romance novel or a mystery novel or poetry or whatever it is they want to write?
Read it a lot. That's pretty much it. You cannot, there are people who think it would be so easy to write a mystery or a thriller or a romance, but they haven't actually read them. You need to read quite a few of them before you start to understand the genre rules and how things have to be framed. And until you read it and love it, I don't think that you can ever successfully write it.
And then sit down and start writing. That's the other thing. People collect books and they take workshops, then they go for long walks, but they never quite sit down and actually start writing.
And then finish writing.
That's the hard part though, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's, for every person, I mean, I don't know what you guys, I'm sure, but people find out you're an author and they're like, oh, I have a great idea for a book. And it's like, okay, cool. Like, but sit down and put words on page and finish it, because starting is easy. Because, you have a great idea, it feels really awesome, it's super, like, you're invigorated. Getting through those sticking points to finish the book and having a finished product that you can, do something with is the hardest part. Like, is just getting to the end, and then you can go back and fix stuff. But until you finish it, you're kind of, that's the number one thing you have to do.
Yeah, I agree. Like, read a lot and then write a lot, and like after you've written one book, if you want to publish, then yeah, go ahead and query on that book, but write the next book, and then write the next book, and write the next book, because it might take a while before you sell, unless you want to do the self-publishing route. And then if you do sell traditionally, you have a whole bunch of books you can sell. But like really concrete, if you wanted to find like your writing buddies and sort of get into creating a community of people that are of like mind as you, and also maybe on the same level as you. Spokane has a really active NaNoWriMo community, which is National Novel Writing Month, that happens every November. And so people kind of set aside everything just to focus on, during the month of November, to write 50,000 words. And there are write-ins everywhere in Spokane, and you can log onto the website and kind of your community, like the Spokane chapter, will do word count against another chapter, like in Indiana or something, that has the same amount of people participating. And it's a really cool way to get hooked up into a writing community very quickly, and finding your peeps.
Great, thank you. Now we're going to take some audience questions with Christy Burns.
One of the things you actually touched on, follow-up as to how much did you write before you were first published? Like, how many books, like, isn't one of you has a book that they, Rebecca, you have a book that you keep submitting?
Yeah, so I wrote 3 books, and it was the 3rd book that was picked up, but my agent rejected that first book, and then she signed me on the 3rd book. So every year or so, I rewrite that first book or edit it just to mess with her. And I send it to her, and last time she said a bad word on the phone, which she doesn't usually do, but I just can't help myself. So she'll get it this year too when I have time. But it was my 3rd book that sold.
Katee, have you written a book that has not seen the light of day?
Oh yeah, my 8th book sold, but I also was writing, I wasn't going back to edit, I just would write a book, finish it, send it out, and then start a new one. And so, but yeah, it was my 8th book that finally sold. That 8.
I'm 3.
3?
Yeah, 3 as well. And the first one was a NaNoWriMo book, and I took out all the contractions so that you get more word counts. And I sent it in, and one of the feedbacks I got was like, your characters all sound very British.
Lucy, how many do you have?
I sold my 2nd one. My first one I wrote so long ago that I no longer have a digital copy, so it's just like a printed out version that I keep in a binder, just so that I have it for all time. But I think it's important to note that, like, I have lots of books that still don't sell that are written. So like I will write proposals or a whole book and I'll send it to my agent, I'll send it out in the world, and they don't sell, and so they have to be shelved. So it's not just a once you break in, you've made it sort of a deal. It's an ongoing process, and it never really stops being hard.
And it's also, publishing's very much like, what have you done for me lately? So I'm a New York Times bestseller, but I still have the same thing, that I've had proposals that are just dead in the water because market, or they just aren't quite right, or there's so many things outside your control that you have to be a little bit crazy to be into this industry, or very stubborn, a little combination of both. But even if you like make it, 2 years later, you could be running up against the same wall. It's just an ongoing cycle.
Audience questions? Dun, dun, dun.
How has the romance novel industry changed in the Me Too movement age?
Ooh, yes. I would say consent has been something that has been very present in the conversation of romance since before the Me Too movement. We've said that it's very much on the cutting edge of like feminism in a lot of ways. But with the Me Too movement, there have been, you've seen, like, we're an industry that's primarily women, I would say, I think. And so there's a lot of the aftermath of that. Writers have been grappling with that just like the rest of everybody. And that comes up in our fiction. And you can see like that rise of people like working through some of these feelings on it. And so the gender dynamics have definitely shifted in some cases to reflect, like, consent is king, it's everything, and it's becoming more and more explicitly stated between the characters before anything happens. And I think that the presence of it so across the board is probably being pushed forward by Me Too.
One of the tropes in romance is like an office romance, and it's a favorite of a lot of readers. I think we've probably taken a step away from the very obvious boss and the very obvious employee that might have been really popular before. It still exists, you can still find it, but I don't think it's as prevalent now.
I don't know, and I don't know that this is necessarily from the Me Too movement, but one thing that has changed probably in the last 5 years or so is that, I mean, one of the things that if you're a feminist romance reader is that everybody's entitled to their own kink. And it's sort of like, you know, pedophilia, no. But other than that, it's like whatever you're into, you should have the right to be into and be able to read fiction about it. But what you see on a lot of books now is trigger warnings, so that you know when you pick up this book that, you know, if these are triggers for any reason, then you might want to stay away from this one. And so the consent, and then also the fact that it's more explicit about, we understand that there are things that not everybody wants to read, so I'm going to tell you about what those things might be in this book. And they might just be things like, you know, mother dies of cancer. Maybe you don't want to read about that in this book, as well as like sexually explicit triggers.
Right over here.
Yes, I wondered, as you're writing, do you have an integrity level that you feel you need to keep to? Or do you find after working with agents and publishers that you tend to move towards what they think they have told you they want or need? Or do you have a plot line or a thought, or you feel your integrity of how you produce your work goes in one direction and that's it? If they like it, fine. If they don't.
I think this is different for every author, and Lucy can talk about this some more, but for me, when it's time to recontract, my editor and my agent will say, what do you want to write? And I usually have like 5 things I want to write, so I'll send them the first chapter, and I'll say, well, which one do you want to read? Because, you know, these are what I want to write. So I haven't changed anything that way. If I'm not writing what I want to write, then it's going to come through on the paper, so it won't work out anyway. But Lucy has.
So I have 0 integrity, and I will pretty much write whatever they're going to pay me to write. One of the reasons I have so many pen names is that I started writing as Tamara Morgan, and that was when I was writing the books of my heart. It didn't always work out. My sales weren't where I wanted them to be, so my publisher said, well, will you write these books about service puppies under a new name and let us control the branding and kind of tell you what we want? And I said, sure, let's give it a try. And it's worked out really well for both of us. You enjoy writing. Yeah, I mean, there's still my stories and there's still my characters, but they could ask me to write, you know, pretty much anything at this point. As long as it doesn't like cross any moral lines, I'm in.
She does have integrity. But I think it's also a misconception in that, you know, if you work with a good editor, they're not going to change your voice and they're not going to change your story. They're going to fit it into the market. So the agent is there to find, like, it's almost like the, you know, the marriage maker, where they're trying to find the right agent that would love, the right editor that will love your voice. And then the editor's job is to make it as marketable as possible. But if they start changing your voice or starting changing the story too much, then that's not a good editor. So, and that's not in their best interest. So I don't think that, I've never come up against having to say, oh no, this is a hard stop. Actually, that's not true. They wanted me to change all of my center of gravity to center of mass because they said it was the same thing, and it's not.
I've definitely come up against the market shifting and me choosing not to shift with it. But I tried. I can write to spec like Lucy does within certain confines, and I did that for a number of years. And it comes down to sometimes, like, I write for a living, and that's my job. And I have bills, and my kids are hungry, and they're growing, and they're so expensive. And so I had to sit down with my agent, or I've had to several times, and be like, okay, like, give me an idea of where the market's going, and I will try to write the most marketable book of my soul, because I have to love what I write, but at the same time, I like paying my bills too. So, and unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't work out, and I've been very fortunate that I have independent publishing, and I have a built-in audience, and so even though the market has shifted, I've been able to put out books myself, and without compromising anything, and strangely enough, readers super respond to that. So there's a happy medium in there for everybody. It's just deciding where on that scale you are, and we're all different.
Another question here?
Do you all write the mass market paperback? Because I don't read mass market paperbacks. I know I read romances, but and do you have the same publisher? And is there a difference for the mass market publisher versus the big name houses?
So there's a big trend in romance right now where we're moving from the mass market, which is the smaller sizes that you see in the grocery stores, usually with a couple or a man on it, to the romances that are trade-sized, and they have like the cartoon illustrated covers. I don't know if you've noticed this in bookstores. So if you go to the romance section, you're going to see a lot more like colorful, illustrated, traditional chick lit from about 10, 15 years ago. The covers are going that way. But interestingly, the content of the books is actually the same. So even though the market is trying to push this different direction for romance, like you're getting the same content inside the book. It's just a different way of packaging it.
Yeah, and the 7 or 8 publishers that have print and distribution, they do trade and they do mass market and they do ebook. So it just depends on the publisher what they want to do with that particular book. And you know, the trade paperbacks are $14.99 to $16.99, and the mass market are $5.99 to $7.99. So Walmart's going to stock more of the mass market because they can, you know, there's more, they take up less room and they can sell more, but Target may do the trade. So you don't really know when you're with a publisher what you're going to be in until marketing kind of decides that. So sometimes we're in both, but we don't really have a say in that.
And as far as writing for the same publisher, Tamara and I both write for Source Books, and Katee just signed a contract with Source Books, and you guys both wrote for Grand Central, right?
Yeah, we wrote for Grand Central.
And then we also write independently and for other publishers.
And I'm mainly with Kensington.
Yeah.
So there are 8 publishers, really, 8 big publishers.
Katee, you talked about trolling through royalty-free sites or Shutterstock, I think you said, of looking for people that look like who your characters are. Rebecca, have you written anything based on like a real person when you're writing? Other than your husband? Maybe a celebrity crush?
Oh, Jason Momoa. Yes. So I can't remember how it happened, but Jason Momoa became the face of my first book, The First Hero, and the fans took it over. And so now we have Talon, that's the guy's name, Talon Thursdays. And if we don't put up pictures of Jason Momoa on that day, we get some really mean comments and emails. And so he has become the face of that first book. And so I met him at Comic-Con and told him that, and so he signed the book for me. So, yes.
Nice, very nice. It took us a while to get to the Jason Momoa photo of that early, but we would, sorry.
I usually lead with that.
Any other questions from the audience? Oh, back there, coming.
Oh, Jason.
So when you start with an idea, do you sit down and sort of take that idea through the entire book and then go back and research and edit? Or do you take your idea and sort of work your way through the research and everything as you're writing?
I am a big fan of brackets. I write in just a sprint from the beginning to the end, and just consistently. I will do a little bit of preemptive research or character profiles before I go in, and I know where I'm going to end up. But if there's something that I don't know, or I need to research, or I need to look into, I just leave myself a note in brackets in my book, in like the manuscript, and then when I edit, I go back and flesh out or do research or occasionally write scenes, because I'm a jerk when I'm drafting, and I just insert something witty here. It's fine. But I usually, or if I'm considering. I do a lot or some nonfiction readings, so if I'm thinking about like, I'd like to have cadaver dogs in my book, even though I'm not drafting that book, I will be doing research just in case it shows up in a book at some point, but I rarely do active research while drafting.
One of the things I like about writing romances is usually in the first chapter, either the people are meeting or they're meeting up again. And so I sit down and I write that first chapter, and I don't know who they are, why they're there, anything about them, and I just have this scene in my head that I write. I have this series called The Scorpius Syndrome. It's about a pandemic, so I'm a little worried about sales now. Not that it's about sales. But so I'd written this first chapter, and it's this woman after the apocalypse, and she's walking down this highway, and she's looking for this particular man, and she tells him who she is, and then she shows him that she has a blue heart. And so that's all I wrote. Then I went back to my other books, and so when it came time to recontract, I sent 5 first chapters to my editor, and she wrote back. She said, I want the blue heart story. And so I called my agent and I said, hey, she wants the blue heart story. And my agent said, well, what blue heart story? So I sent it, that first chapter to her, and she called me. She goes, why does this woman have a blue heart? I'm like, I have no idea. No clue. So then I had to figure it out from there. So that's how I do it.
I'm a research as you go writer, so when I write, I have a daily word count goal that I have to meet no matter what. And I always say that some days it takes me an hour and some days it takes me 8 hours. And it just depends on if I've reached one of those tricky research spots, because then I will fall into the internet hole of wanting to learn everything about that before I can keep going. So it's probably not the most efficient system, but it's my system, so.
Yeah, I give myself time to just free write, and usually after like 3 to 5 chapters, I'll say, okay, I'll go off on a tangent here if I don't have some sort of outline, so I have sort of a sticky note system where I outline the book, but not really outline the book. It's more about making sure that I hit the turning points, like where the action and the tension kind of have to shift. And I might just have like, interesting stuff has to happen here to racket up the tension, or like battle scene, you know, like, so I have something to write towards, but allow myself the creative free writing in between. If I outline the book, then I'm not really interested in the book anymore, because now I know how it ends.
All right, wasn't that fun? So here's my big surprise. In November, we hosted a big event with Tom Moeller, who wrote the book on whistleblowing. There was way more sex that night. I mean, like a lot more. You guys actually told about craft. He got into the naughty stuff. So we're gonna have a few quick things before. So first, I gotta thank our sponsors. So we get to do this because so many people have helped us to do this. And if you haven't figured out why we really do it, this is the newspaper equivalent of a bake sale. So we do this so that we have this year newspapers they're predicting almost 200 will close this year. And we never wanted that to happen, so we wanted to build a way so that the community could own the journalism and fund it. So in the last year, you all funded 4 members of our newsroom that you own. They have a Creative Commons copyright, so we don't own them. So the community does, but it gets even better. We've kind of added up how everything's going to work this next year, and we are going to add 5 in 2020. Including a full-time politics writer in another one in Olympia, and we're about to become the smallest newspaper in America with a DC bureau.